The transition to this prep phase was actually pretty easy, considering that over the course of the last year, my main focus was to get really lean and then be able to maintain that. So I'm going to go over some of the changes, some of the things that I did with my training, intensity techniques, volume, and just kind of contrast what I was doing last year and what I consider to be kind of an off-season phase. And I use the off-season term a little bit loosely because typically off-season would mean that you're attempting to grow. And with this TRT transition, even though I refer to it as the off-season, I was never really growing. I was trying to maintain what I had built over so many years. So I explain my definition of off-season just so that you can understand that it was a different phase than it is now. Okay, the primary focus now is just to get shredded so that I can do as well as I can for these shows and be in the best condition that I possibly can. One of the main things that changed, schedule of training during the week. Not a huge difference, but typically in the off season when I'm trying to maximize recovery, I'm only training 3 days a week. I've been doing this a long time, and I know for me that even a change from 3 days to 4 days can make a huge difference in my recovery. So in the off season, when my calories are a little bit higher, even though this last off season they weren't much higher because I was getting leaner, I was trying to maximize recovery and I was only training 3 days a week. That allows me to just unload on muscle groups when I'm in the gym and not worry about if there's enough time between not only each session, but between hitting that muscle group and the next time that I come back to that muscle group. When I switch to prep mode, I don't like to do as much work in each session. Partly because calories are restricted. I'm typically doing more cardio, so I like to break it up then and make that transition from 3 to 4 days. I will typically sit at that 4-day schedule, kind of a Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday type of setup, as long as I can possibly sit there. When I get to the point that I'm run down and I feel that maybe recovery is an issue, I'm struggling to give the sets at the end of the workout the same attention, or they're not getting the same focus as the sets at the beginning of the workout, then I will stretch to that 5th day. I do not like to train 5 days a week. I don't want to sound lazy, I don't want to sound unmotivated, unbeast mode-ish, unhardcore, whatever. But the reality is I just don't like to train 5 days in a row. I have other things to do, I have a business to run, I have family shit to take care of. I've spoken about it quite a bit in this DVD. I try to keep balance in my life when it comes to my personal life, my family, and my obligations for training and diet and that sort of thing. 5 days is typically much closer to shows. And the reason I do that, again, is so that I have to do less work in each session. Keep in mind, too, I don't have the typical commute to the gym that a lot of you have. It takes me 45 to 50 minutes one way to get to the gym. So, even just an extra day of going to the gym, is another hour and a half, hour and 40 minutes of commute time. Now, I'm not bitching. I'm used to driving because of where we live. The point is even making that decision to go to 1 extra day is not just the time in the gym, but the time to get there and the time to get home as well. That 5-day schedule, typically, and I'm not there yet. Right now I'm sitting at roughly 8, 10, and 12 weeks out. And I say that because I haven't narrowed down the shows that I'm doing yet. Those are the 3 that are on the radar. So I typically won't look at that 5-day schedule until I get closer to that 4 to 5 weeks out. Sometimes I don't. I stay at 4. If I can stay at 4, I stay at 4. That added rest day in the middle of the week is a big deal. Okay? It allows me to recharge not only physically, but psychologically, after 2 days of training to be able to come back in for the next 2 and then have the weekend off. I will not, just for the record, just in case it's crossed anybody's mind when I'm talking about this 5-day schedule, you may be wondering, well, why are you going 5 straight days and then 2 days off? Because that's the balance part. I try to get all my work done Monday through Friday when it comes to weight training and cardio. If I'm behind, then it'll go into the weekend if it has to. But ideally, I want all my work done Monday through Friday because Saturday and Sunday is family time, time for my wife, time for my kids, time to skip load. Again, it comes back to balance. If I need it, I'll do it. If I don't need it, it's all gonna get done Monday through Friday. If that means training 5 straight days in a row, I'm training 5 straight days in a row so that I have 2 days on the weekend to have fun and get away from the gym and do normal shit. Normal fun shit. Volume in the off-season versus volume in a prep phase. Typically, my volume is only slightly lower in the off-season. I do have what I call a progressive volume training protocol, and I've used it for a while. Some of you watching this DVD will be like, oh, Skip, you're still using the same protocol that you were using, 4 years ago. And that's true. And I want to make sure that I say this without sounding disrespectful to anybody. I don't change nutritional protocols or my ideology on nutrition, training, or anything else because, oh, it's been too long and I need to put something new out there. I don't do that. When I have something that works, I continue to use it and I continue to advocate for that approach. Skip loading is a good example. Yes, skip loading has evolved over the years. I continue to learn. I'm still learning. But skip loading is skip loading. I'm still skip loading because it works. I'm not going to come up with some other protocol to try to reinvent myself, get more attention, use it as a business move or anything like that. Right now, I think we're in a phase with training programs that it's almost an atmosphere of who can come up with the craziest shit. If you've done 50 sets of 100 reps, then someone else is going to do 75 sets of 150 reps. And, ooh, that's just hardcore, and that's bad. The protocol that I use for training was so effective and still is that I'm just leaving it alone. Not only that, but there are different options as far as frequency. You can use it, or I can use it, you can, whoever can use it. It's based on frequency and the progression of volume. By frequency, I mean back and chest is typically trained twice a week. Okay, the main reason for that is back and chest, when you pound back and chest, you're also pounding shoulders, triceps, and biceps. So you tend to get more upper body work even just by doubling up back and chest. You're training the upper body basically twice as much, and you're still hitting indirectly arms, shoulders, etc. Now, I don't want to get into my training protocol too much because you can check it out on intensemuscle.com. It's all laid out in detail, so I prefer not to go into that right now. But you can do 3 days, 4 days. It can even be bumped to 5 days. With my clients, I individualize that as far as what that client needs. So there's a lot of room to maneuver there to make it specific to that particular person without having to change the entire protocol and go with something else. The other thing when I say progressive volume is important, right now we're in a high volume, not trend or fad, but everything in training, just like anything in nutrition, cycles through. So you had the Arnold days where it was high volume, and that was kind of the trend. Everybody did it. In the 90s, it switched to, well, not in the 90s, but in the 80s, Lee Haney, we had 6 to 8 reps and that sort of thing. Switched to very low volume, kind of Dorian Yates style, high intensity training for the 90s. DC training was even in there as well. I don't want to say it was abbreviated training, but it certainly wasn't high volume. So then what do you have? It was only a matter of time now before that was going to switch then to higher volume training. I use fortitude training, higher volume, higher frequency. Mountain dog training is a good example, higher volume, higher frequency. That just seems to be the trend right now, and for good reason. I'm a very strong supporter of higher volume work. I think it's safer, especially for my demographic. People who have a lot of years under their belt, maybe even injuries. That high intensity, low volume, balls out for only a couple sets is a very productive way to train, don't get me wrong, but it leaves you very vulnerable to not only just major injuries, but minor aches and pains and that sort of thing as well. So I prefer the higher volume, not only for myself, but for people who are in my same demographic. So my off season is going to be a little bit lower in volume. I tend to do a little bit higher volume for prep. I feel that it helps metabolically. I also like to run most of the time glycogen depleted. When you're glycogen depleted, your body tends to tap into body fat stores that much easier. So I think it helps you to get leaner. Now, going back to the progressive volume, I will progress through my volume in the off season, but not so much in prep mode. Progressing through volume basically means that I might start with only 2 working exercises per exercise, 2 working sets per exercise, And then after a couple weeks, I will jump to 3 working sets. After a couple weeks, if I feel good, I'll jump to 4 working sets. And then I will start over again at 2. That's the increase in volume, and then it comes down, and it increases again, it comes down, and increases again. In prep mode, I typically start prep lower volume, but I build through relatively quickly up to that 3 to 4 sets per exercise volume, and I kind of hang there. I don't shift the volume lower unless I come up with a situation where I'm just dragging ass, I feel like recovery is an issue, that sort of thing. Something else that I do that I think is important to note is I always cruise off season and during prep. I understand that for a lot of people that is a difficult concept to grasp. No one wants to cut back either intensity or on weights or effort or whatever else during a prep. But there comes a time where it just needs to happen. I won't even say it needs to happen. Let me rephrase that. Anybody can push through, and that's typically the mindset of most people during a prep. Oh, I just got to push through. Oh, I just got to push through. It's a prep. It's a prep. But it's so incredibly beneficial to drop back, if not twice, at least one time for a week during the course of a prep. If you're starting a prep at 20 weeks, and you go 10 straight weeks, balls out, you're doing cardio, you're progressing, you're on restricted calories, you can benefit from a lighter week, less intensity, not going to failure, getting in the gym, getting a pump, getting the hell out. It'll help recovery, it won't impact your metabolism in a negative way at all, and it actually helps your psyche too. So when you come back from that week, you're ready to pound some shit. Psychologically, you're typically in a better place when you come back off of that cruise week than you were the couple weeks prior. If you have any aches or pains at that point, instead of them getting worse, they tend to, if not completely recover, they'll recover quite a bit or quite substantially in just that week of light training. And what do I mean by light training? I mean what I call fluff. Go in and get a pump. Make your pace very, very quick. Exercise to exercise. Do some things that you don't normally do. Instead of doing heavy dumbbell presses, do cable flies. I call it stretch and squeeze type things. Pec deck. Machine curls. Dumbbell rows. Very deliberate movements, that sort of thing. Not to failure, not terribly heavy. Ideally, you don't even want to be sore. that will allow your body to catch up and for you to recover that week, not only physically, but psychologically as well. Come back to next week, hammer the shit out of the last 10 weeks. Exercise selection from the off season to prep phase. Honestly, it's pretty much exactly the same. I just vary everything that I do from workout to workout. Even if I were to use the same exercises, I will change the exercise sequence. I will change rep tempo. I change anything I can change. Okay? I've trained for a long time. For me to come up with a different stimulus, I've got to, or come up with something that is going to seem to my body to be a different stimulus, I have to consciously be aware that I'm doing things differently from workout to workout. Otherwise, it's pretty easy for someone who's been training over 30 years, 33 or 34 years now. My body can pretty much see almost anything coming down the pipe. So I got to try to mix it up a little bit. I will admit that in the past, I was not a huge fan of high intensity techniques, rest, pause, drop sets, that sort of thing. In part because if I compared myself to 1,000 other bodybuilders, my recovery is shit. Even when I was gassed in the past, my recovery compared to other people who would be on what I was on was just not that good. I would find myself teetering on overtraining in only as little as 3 weeks if I added in high intensity techniques like rest pause, drop sets, things like that. When I did DC training, I could not do rest pause. I would only be able to train to failure, because anything more than that, I would quit progressing after only a few weeks. But I did progress very, very well on the straight sets to failure. So that'll give you some idea right there of recovery, because when I was doing the DC training, I was gassed. So imagine now, obviously, if you don't have very good recovery and you're younger when you're gassed, and now you're older and you're only on TRT, I think it's logical to assume that recovery is not going to be as good as it was in the past. So if it wasn't good to begin with, it ain't great now. But I will say this. One thing that I have changed, and I will give John Meadows credit for this. I had him on one of our radio shows talking about training, and I asked him if he really felt that his progress was more so related to his change in training techniques and his high intensity level and where he would take each set, or if it was more related to his nutrition and his focus on recovery and things like that. And when he said training, I was actually surprised at first. And I won't say I scoffed at it. I have a lot of respect for John Meadows. And to prove my point, I gave it further thought because of his response, because I didn't agree right away. And it occurred to me, I thought to myself, and some of you listening right now may think, well, that's obvious. It's not obvious, because you can only train to your own individual recovery ability. So when he is saying this, I'm thinking to myself, I don't have that kind of recovery. So if I start training balls out, I'm not going to recover, I'm not going to grow, I'm going to end up overtrained. Instead of just going with that and being like, John can do that stuff and grow, he's genetically superior, and I am a genetically inferior person, so I have to keep doing what I'm doing and not grow very well. I decided that coming into this prep phase that I would change up my intensity techniques. I didn't even change my volume, which typically when you increase or change to intensity techniques, you're going to have to fall back with volume. And I didn't even do that. What I did was I added a couple rest pause or a couple drop sets on a couple of my exercises on the last set, and just figured I'll go balls out and see what happens. It didn't go very well 2 or 3 weeks in, maybe 4 weeks in, but I stuck with it. And after 5, 6, 7 weeks, all of a sudden, I'm looking at it and I'm going, oh my God. It's quite possible that in the past I didn't give this enough time. I was saying to myself, well, you're already overtrained, you better back off. Almost being too cautious. But sticking it out this time, and mind you, my recovery now on TRT and being older is not what it was when I was playing with the higher intensity techniques 10 years ago when I was gassed and younger. I just didn't stick it out long enough, I think, because it has been very productive. My strength has been increasing, not much, but it's been increasing during a prep while on TRT. Now, how much, you might ask? I'm not talking about 40 pounds on my bench. I'm talking, a rep here or there, 10 pounds here or there over, 3 or 4 weeks. Certainly not anything ridiculously dramatic, but nonetheless significant based on the fact that I thought that I would be overtraining and regressing, and my recovery is not supposed to be very good because I'm older and on TRT. But basically what is happening is I am using these intensity techniques and forcing my body to adapt. Now, how much longer will it last? I'm 8, 10, 12 weeks out right now from projected shows. Maybe I'll feel like shit and be overtrained in 2 weeks. Maybe it'll go all the way damn near to the show. Obviously, I'll cut those intensity techniques back closer to the show, but not now. They're working incredibly well, and I'm gonna stick to it. And I'm glad that I gave it more thought, and actually I'm glad that I asked John that question that basically just made me rethink. It's funny because you do something for a long time, you're known to be good at what you do, you're known to know your shit, but you never know all there is to know. It's a constant learning process, even with your own body, which is funny because you would think, oh my God, 33, I would think. 33, 34 years of training. I know my body, and I do. But I don't know every single thing about it. I am still constantly learning. And I think that's part that, I don't want to say keeps it fun, but it keeps it interesting. Because it may well be boring if that weren't the case. Scheduled days off, just real quick, off-season versus contest prep. If I gotta take a day off in the off-season, honestly, I'm only training 3 days a week. I'll push that workout to the next day. I don't like to do that because I'm kind of OCD and I'm a highly structured person. So I like to train Monday, Wednesday, Friday. It's just my thing. I feel better when I'm on that schedule. But listen, if my kid has a baseball game, I'm not a douchebag dad. I have no regrets or no shitty feelings about going, I got to change my workout to a day later. I want to be able to see my kid play. And when push comes to shove, that workout's going to be just as productive tomorrow as it would have been today. So that allows me to keep balance and keep those things, keep doing the fun things and still get my training done in the off season. Prep is a completely different story typically. If something big comes up, that's different. But I tend to stay with my schedule almost no matter what. I think the main reason for that is just that I'm one of those people that when I get on stage, even though I'm just trying to prove that I can do this TRT and I can still get incredible condition, and I'm not chasing a pro card or trying to get to nationals or anything else, I'm still competitive enough that I don't want to stand on that stage thinking to myself, if only I would have done that. I'm the type of person, and I tell this to my kids all the time, if you're not going to go 100%, don't bother going 97. Don't even bother going 92. Fuck, go 40. I mean, it's just all or none. You either step on the gas or you don't. Bad analogy, but you get what I'm saying. It's just all out or nothing. Doesn't matter if it's my kids in school or their sports or anything else. Why are you going to do something half-assed? Save your time, sit down on the couch and watch TV. Don't do anything. It's just going to be wasted time. That's how I feel about it. So when it comes time to prep, all my ducks are in a row. I'm highly structured, and I'm quite anal about it, if I'm being honest. Maybe OCD. I don't know. Nah, not really OCD, but pretty anal. Cardio schedule, off-season versus prep. Obviously, I would do more cardio during the prep phase. That's not what I'm getting at, versus the off-season. It's timing more than anything else. Because I tend to do double sessions that are shorter, versus one longer session. My typical schedule that I feel the best and feel that it doesn't impact my weight training is I get up, I have my coffee, and then I will have my first meal, which is always a protein drink and typically some fat, but it's never a solid meal. I have not had a solid meal for my first meal in 15 years probably. I can't stand it. I can do it, I don't want to do it. Therefore I don't. Then what I do is I do my cardio right before the second meal, which the second meal would be a solid food meal. Typically, and I'll just give you a time frame. If I get up at 10, I have my coffee until 11:30. I will have my protein drink at 11:30. I typically have my first solid meal 2 hours later. For the first meal of the day being just a protein drink and a relatively small amount of fat, that doesn't stick with me very long. If I had to stretch it to 3 hours, I'd probably be pretty hungry. So I go with 2. So I will typically go out into the garage about 40 minutes before that second meal to do a 30-minute session. That allows me 5 to 10 minutes after I come in when I'm done with my session to be able to get my food around and remain on schedule. It's important for me to be on schedule because I train in the evenings and I have to meet my wife. And because my wife has a real job and works downtown on a beautiful day like today, it takes her an hour and 15 minutes to commute one way, and she leaves at 7 in the morning. She works till 6:30, meets me at the Tanner, 7:30, then we go across the street to the gym at 8, train until 10. If we do cardio, we're there till 10:30, quarter to 11. It takes 45 minutes to get back to the house, and my wife is falling into bed. That's 4 of her 5 days during the week. I can't be late to the gym and stay married. Well, I could probably stay married, but she wouldn't want to go to the gym. So it is vital that I am to the gym on time. That means my meals have to be scheduled, not only scheduled to fit in there, but I got to get those meals in when they're scheduled, because if I'm off by a half hour, she ain't going to hear me saying, oh, I'm going to be a half hour late to the gym. That ain't happening. All that means is my inability to stay structured and to take in my meals when I'm supposed to is now going to impact her, because she's going to get home even later, lose sleep, and that will continue to impact her for the rest of the week because she has no time to make up that sleep until the weekend. And I've been happily married for 25 years by not doing stupid shit like that. Now, every now and then, I may be off a little, but if I'm off, I got to cut a meal out. And that is not cool when you're in a dieting phase. Everybody's different, but if I drop a meal and I do it for 2 or 3 days out of the week, metabolically, I start to suffer. I do much, much better on 6 or 7 meals than I do on 5 or 6. Taking out even one meal has a significant impact on my metabolism, personally, just me. Oh, the other part of the cardio that I was missing was the cardio at night. Just real quick, we do post-workout cardio after we train at night. Immediately after. Obviously, there's no nutrition taken in between the end of the weight training session and the cardio session. We just immediately get on cardio. Another thing that's important too is I am not a believer in BCAAs or EAAs during or before cardio. I don't like the idea. I don't care if you have studies. I understand there's a study to back everything up. I don't think it's a good idea. My philosophy is very, very simple when it comes to cardio. Do not provide any other fuel source other than body fat, because as soon as you do, you're giving your body an alternative fuel source to body fat. That means when you put aminos in your system and everybody thinks, I'm going to do this because I'm just so worried I'm going to lose muscle. That's just, to me, that's absurd. Okay, it's about as silly as saying, oh my gosh, I'm going to go all night fasted. I should probably wake up in the middle of the night and take aminos because I'm going to be catabolic and I'm going to lose muscle tissue. Jesus, are you kidding me? There just seems to be a point where I think we tend to go overboard and overthink things, and to me that's just absurd. You want your primary main fuel source to be body fat. That means fasted cardio is the best. You may not agree, and that's fine, but that's my opinion on it. Post-workout, same thing. It's essentially fasted because you're glycogen depleted. You haven't taken in any nutrition for a couple hours, at least. So you're gonna dip into body fat stores that much quicker because of being glycogen depleted and not having a meal in you. Now, if you happen to have a meal in you and it's protein fat, great. But I am, and I go into this in the cardio chapter as well, I am a huge proponent of keeping carbs away from cardio sessions. I think that's huge. I think it makes the cardio more efficient. It makes your progress better. It's just, in the end, I just think it's a more efficient way to do cardio and to progress. Two things here, just to finish this off. Rep ranges. Rep ranges are all over the place. I do admit that I tend to, and I have to actually fight it. In the off season, I have this thing where I tend to stay in the 6 to 8 or 6 to 9 rep range a lot. Maybe it was because I started training in the Lee Haney days in the 80s, and it's just ingrained or in me. It's just branded on my brain. I don't know. I tend to feel the weight the most, can still use really good form. I feel like the muscle fails, not out of exhaustion, but because the muscle fibers are exhausted and they're not firing anymore, versus me running out of air, doing 20 reps or something like that, or running out of oxygen, I don't know, something like that. The other thing is as I fatigue further into my sets and into my workout, it's harder to do higher rep stuff for me. I just don't feel it. It just feels easy. So what I tend to do to cover all my rep ranges, and I go into this a little bit in the training chapter as well, but I tend to start with a weight that I can start in a higher rep range, 12 to 15, and I try to stay there and let fatigue lower my rep ranges from there. This is really important during the prep phase, even more so than the off season, because it allows me to cover all those rep ranges and minimize the risk of injury by not opening in that 6 to 8 or 6 to 10 rep range. Okay? That way the fatigue brings the reps down and brings me into those lower rep ranges. To me, it's safer. By the time I get into those lower rep ranges, I'm pretty damn warm. The only other thing I want to add is the ab training. And this is one of the things that I changed. It's not even really off season to contest prep. It's something that I changed this year. As I've aged, I've really had a problem with my midsection. I call it Dave Palumbo turtle shell syndrome or something like that. As I've aged, and I think as most people age who have trained for a long time, we can argue about why. We can talk about insulin, we can talk about growth, we can talk about force feeding, and we can talk about 100 different reasons. But the reality is the older competitors who have been around for a long time tend to have a problem with distension in their midsection. And I have what I think is the couple main reasons, and then I'll talk to 10 other people and they've got different reasons and we debate it and no one really knows. So I thought this year during this prep I would take a couple steps to try to minimize that distension. Whether it would work, I didn't know. But I focused and settled on two main things. One of them was more frequent ab training. So what I do is I am training my abs before every session. If I go into the gym, the first thing I'm doing is training abs. Well, the first thing I'm doing with weights is I'm training abs. Typically I stretch first, but then when I start my weight training session, I do abs. There's an added bonus there too, that it warms up my midsection, helps to make sure that my back, my lower back, which I've had a history of chronic injuries with, is warm. But the main reason that I'm doing it is I do one exercise with 4 to 5 working sets before every session because I want to see if maybe I've just been under training my abs. And the reason I think that could be a possibility is I have weak abs, and I never did in the past. For me to do, say, decline sit-ups, I was lucky to do 10 to 12, and I just fucking wanted to die, excuse my language. So it also allows me to train a lot of different exercises over the course of the week. So I pick one exercise per session. It may be, you know, one of my favorites, like a machine crunch, a rope crunch, or it could be flat on the floor, leg lifts, or reverse crunches. I come up with a big variety, and it's funny because I have noticed right now I've been in prep January, February, March, probably 12, 13 weeks. A marked difference in my midsection. Now, I still have distension. It didn't go away, but my waist is probably almost 1.5 inches, almost 2 inches smaller at this weight than it would have been in the past, or that it was in the past. It could be argued that I was gassed then. It could be argued that I was using growth hormone then. There are other things that can be contributing. I'm just telling you, without getting into it too deep, I'm not a big believer in the GH insulin issue for midsection. I've seen too many people use GH and insulin and have tiny waists. So I think there's a lot of different factors, and I think that it seems obvious that now that I'm strengthening my midsection more and training it more intensely, my waist is getting a little bit smaller and a little bit tighter. The other thing that I'm doing that you might laugh at is I actually went back to using a belt, primarily for legs, but also for back. Anything where I need to stabilize my midsection. I did that not only to see if it would help with distension or with the size of my midsection, but also to revisit whether it would actually help my lower back or not. And I use it for almost all leg training and any rowing type movement for back. I don't know if it has helped or not, to be honest with you. What I do know is this, and I got this actually from Phil Heath, and I don't know if it matters. Phil Viz is a good example too. He wears a belt religiously. When he trains legs, Phil did too. Phil Viz trains way harder than Phil Heath, and that's not a shot at Phil Heath. I think Phil Heath is a great bodybuilder. He's a good dude. I got no problem with the guy. I'm just trying to call a spade a spade. They both have very, very small midsections. So I start paying attention to the guys who have worn belts for a long time. And there seems to be a pattern that their guts aren't as distended or aren't as big. Is it coincidence? It could be. My thing is this. It's so easy to put on a belt, especially when I get badass belts from Elite FTS all the time. I get tons of gear from Elite FTS, but their belts are just insanely awesome. So I have an old school leather belt that I wear anytime I'm training legs and anytime I'm doing any type of rowing for back. Will it help? Don't know. But it certainly won't hurt me to be wearing it to take that precaution.